Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well today. Playing some Golgari yet again, and we are on the play, and that's been happening a lot lately. I don't know what I've done to deserve this run of good luck, but seems like we've been hitting the play a whole lot lately, and I sure do like our hand. We have the proverbial ideal of 4 spells to 3 lands. We have both colors in abundance. We even have a third green source for our Scavenging Ooze, which is always really nice to see, should this be a matchup where we want to lean heavily into Ooze. We have a nice balance of 2 threats versus 2 pieces of interaction. We kind of cover all of our bases. We've got something that we can deploy early, something that locks up the late game, although they both have late game value, obviously, and we disrupt the hand and we interact with the board. So, as far as blind game ones go, this is about all we could really ask for. We don't know whether everything here will be good, but we know that our hand at least functions and has a nice balance to it. So definitely happy to keep this one, as is our opponent. So, of course, we want to lead off on the Inquisition, see what they are up to. And we are against blue-white control. Alright, so right off the bat with cards like Terminus and Hieroglyphic Illuminations, this looks like a stock blue-white control list. I do have a matchup on the channel from about 2 weeks ago that is against blue-white control, but that's more of a... It's like a control mid-range hybrid, right? They play the enter the battlefield trigger cards like Wall of Omens and... I believe they played Restoration Angel. It's been a little while, and Kitchen Finks, right? So they had, they're definitely still a kind of a blue-white control deck, but they had more of a board presence, more creatures, and more ETB value. This looks like the straight-up blue-white Miracles build with Jason Teferi. And, of course, we can only take Path to Exile here, but it's worth examining their hand quickly. So, Terminus is something we really have to remember because they have a turn 6 Wrath available, which... while slower than the standard cost, is still relevant. And of course, if they ever find a Jace, then we can expect this to be going back on top if it's still around, if we haven't found more hand disruption and taking it away by then. The other thing to note is they do have some utility out of their land base to watch out for. They also have 2 draw 2 spells. They have 2 copies of Hieroglyphic Illuminations, and those are very, very good against us. Obviously, we like to trade 1 for 1, and then we like to sneak in a few 2 for 1s, excuse me, as well. Oh, MTGO, don't do this. Don't do this. There we go. Okay. False alarm. I thought we were going to have the application close up on us. Not today. Not today. So yeah, those cards are obviously a little slow and grindy in general, which is perfectly good against us. I do like that addition to the deck because, of course, it can cycle for 1 if they don't need it or can't afford to play that slow of a game in any given matchup. But for now, we just we draw another Blooming Marsh, which, you know, getting our 4th land is not bad because we have a Tireless Tracker in hand, and that's all right. So. We just get to be on the Grizzly Bear plan for now. Drawing a Collective Brutality. Okay, that's a good draw. That's a good draw. First thing we're going to do is get in here with the Ooze, see if they're interested in a Snapcaster block, or maybe they drew another path, anything like that. Not quite. That's totally fine with us. Let's lead off on the Collective Brutality here. Alright, so... we know about a few of these things already, and we now see that they have found an Opt and a Cryptic command. So their hand is stacked. Their hand is stacked. They still don't have a 4th land, but they probably play as many lands as we do. They're probably on 25 lands or so. They will get there. That's not a realistic hope, especially because they have this Opt to help them dig. So here, you know... Opt is actually kind of a dangerous card against them, for them, against any deck that plays creatures, really, because, of course, Opt into Terminus is very, very powerful. So there is an outside consideration for taking the Opt here, right? because maybe we can stop them from hitting land drops. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's realistic. Our clock, it's not like we have a Tarmogoyf out there, right? Our clock is not particularly fast. We have to take a value card, so it's going to be either a Hieroglyphic Illumination or a Cryptic command, and I think we just have to take the Cryptic. I think we just want to make sure that they don't counter anything particularly good. Cryptic is also a really good way for them to stay in the game, and, you know, kind of no matter what's going on. If they have a Cryptic command, they will probably survive it, at least for that turn. Dig a little bit deeper. I'm pretty happy to play out the Forest there, because if I have to shock this in next turn, that's totally fine. My life total's not that relevant, but we might as well play around not having to do that if we don't. Like, for example, we could draw Verdant Catacombs next turn, then we go Tracker into Catacombs. We might never have to shock this in. And I don't want to play this tapped because I want to start eating away at their graveyard with the Ooze this turn. Like, my Ooze is not going to be very big this game, almost certainly. They don't present many creatures, and their ways to answer ours often involve exiling or putting them back into the library, right? So our Ooze is not going to have a lot of food, but it can still keep their graveyard nice and clear, clear of high-value Snapcaster targets, keep it nice and low for Search for Azcanta so that struggles to transform, all that good stuff. All right, Liliana the Last Hope is a very good card in this matchup. Against anything grindy, anything control, it's very good. Again, maybe a little less valuable against blue-white control, at least so far as her -2 is concerned. Again, just because they're not likely to put things in our graveyard for us to buy back. But she's still great. She's still a win condition that they can struggle to pressure, and that's arguably her best role here. Now, I think I still want to just start trying to get cards. And the Tireless Tracker resolves, so that's a beautiful thing. We didn't draw another land, so we are going to shock this in. Totally fine here. Again, blue-white control is not a deck that pressures our life total inordinately. So here we get to hold up Fatal Push and a Skooz activation. On our end step, they're going to opt. Then they're going to fetch, and they're going to pass. Alright, no Terminus off the top. That's definitely a very good one against us. Right now, we don't ever, unless some very strange circumstances dictate that we should, we don't ever want to present more than 2 creatures at a time against the blue-white control deck. Our threat density is low enough, and we compete so heavily on the value axis that if they get like a 3-for-1, we are probably not coming back from that. So presenting 2 is the upper limit of what I like to do, and even if they were to Supreme Verdict or Terminus us right now, we're not really getting 2-for-1 because we got a clue off of the tracker already, and we even got to keep their graveyard a little bit lower than it would otherwise be with the Ooze, right? So that's just a good rule of thumb to remember, unless you really think it's do or die and you just have to go wide and make them have it, you know, so you can present lethal next turn. You don't want to expose more than 2 creatures at once, in my opinion. Alright, Tarmogoyf is, of course, a good card in just about any matchup. It's a little awkward here, though, right? Because we cannot have a double spell turn. We could potentially have a clue and a spell turn, but the spell, if we don't hit a land off our clue, has to be Tarmogoyf, and then, like I just said, we are exposing too many creatures. So I think first we're just going to attack, or move to attacks. They're going to opt. Looking for a Terminus. Presumably they don't have it. Alright. Now that's an understandable play for sure. Maybe they're also looking for a Path to Exile and they don't mind pathing something at this point. But the reason that's good for us is because now they have 1 unknown in hand, right? Now we're not afraid of Cryptic Command. And now they also don't get to cast Hieroglyphic Illumination in our end step. So that opt looking for the Terminus was a kind of a high-risk, high-reward play, really. And now we have a better window to resolve the Liliana. Now, they could still have Logic, not Mono-Leak cards like this, but A, it just reduces the number of cards that they could have, and B, it represents just a 1-for-1 trade if they do have it, and they don't have it, so that's great for us. we're just going to take her up. We're just going to treat her as something that's moving toward the win condition right now. Once more, we are holding up push or scoos. So that turn was really nice for us. We got in for 5 and we resolved a Liliana. That was really good. That was really, really good. And they didn't get to do anything in our end step. Alright, they just make a land drop and pass. They still haven't exposed this Field of Ruin, so we still know everything in their hand but 1 card. We might as well take away an opt in the end step, and we get a Field of Ruin of our own. Alright. That's a fine draw here. Any land here was pretty decent with a clue in the works. And of course, they have a Celestial Colonnade, so Field of Ruin's actually pretty nice here. We're going to main phase a clue. See what we draw. These Fatal Pushes are not looking too hot. They also answer Colonnade, it must be said, but we would rather hit it with the Field of Ruin, right? So, let's move to attacks. Once again, we're going to kind of make them do something here, or take the damage. You know, we're kind of happy to draw out a Cryptic Command potentially here, but we'd actually rather just get in for the damage. They're not assigning any blocks, and I still don't want to expose myself to a 3-for-1 by playing this Goyf. So I'm just going to use the clue now, get in another point of damage. It's going to put them down to 3, which is Treetop Village range if we find that. We could also have drawn Inquisition or Thoughtseize here, which might have been a tempting play as well in the second main. Instead, we drew Lily of the Veil, which is very, very good in the matchup, but of course we can't play her now. So we just tick up the Lily. The Last Hope, that is. And we will pass, and here comes probably an Illumination, I assume. Sure enough, there it is. Alright. Okay, opponents made their 6th land drop. They still haven't played the Field of Ruin, so we still know about that. And they're going to hardcast a Terminus. Alright, yep. Nothing we can do about that. We will gobble up a Hieroglyphic Illumination in response. And then our stuff goes to the bottom. Another Lily of the Veil. Alright, very, very interesting. I like this a lot. I tapped some lands and then realized I didn't have double black. Whoops. So we're going to start off with the Lily of the Veil. Before we do anything else, we're going to tick her up and force our opponent to decide what they're going to discard with as little information as possible. Here I'm pretty free to pitch a Fatal Push. Even if, like, it's pretty bad in the matchup, they're going to come out post side. Again, it does answer Colonnade, but we have an extra one now. We definitely are going to pitch one over any of these other cards. Liliana the Veil is so powerful here that we don't want to throw away even our redundant copies lightly. Right? Because they could deal with her. They could have Detention Sphere, something like that. Alright, so they pitched that Field of Ruin. Alright. Field of Ruin sat in their hand since the opening turn and then just never got down. Poor field, but we get to play Tarmogoyf. We've got Liliana Tribal protected by a Tarmogoyf. It's looking pretty good for us. Now, they do potentially get to fire up a Colonnade here and take care of our Lily of the Veil, but that's another reason we kept this one around, right? Like, we almost kind of want them to do that. Now, let's see what they have. They have yet another land drop, and they have a Path to Exile. Sure, that's pretty decent for him. At least we get to go get a land off of it. Teferi. Teferi's a little bit rough. Yeah, Teferi gets to tuck away our Lily, the Last Hope. So we were hoping that the best they could do there is maybe fire up the Colonnade to either take this out or take our Liliana, the Last Hope, down to 2. Either one would have been just fine with us. And then, you know, maybe Path Dargoyf or whatever. Now they have something left behind we need to deal with. We don't have a manland, and our Last Hope is too far away to realistically be a win con anymore, right? Because by the time we draw her, the game will, by the time we draw her, replay her, and start ticking her up, it's unlikely that she'll be a decisive factor in the game anymore. She might still be a role player, but yeah, that Teferi was pretty good for them. But hey, you know what? So is this Maelstrom Pulse. That's definitely an answer to the Teferi, that is for sure. So, definitely not mad about that. And here, once again, I'm going to really rate the Liliana highly enough to keep the redundant one around in hand. And here we're going to plan to hit their colonnade with a Field of Ruin pretty much no matter what happens, but let's see what they do. They're going to opt, sure. Alright, they don't bother firing up the colonnade because they know we have the field. We'll still hit it anyway. Just a quick note, when my color spread is no longer a concern, like when I have more than enough sources to actually cast everything and to cast any 2 spells in my deck with any spread of lands, I tend to get the second forest before I get the other swamps, and that's simply because of the card Scavenging Ooze. Like, if I get a Scooze, if it resolves, if it's a factor in the game, I just want as many green sources as possible. That's just a general rule that I follow with the deck. Very, very minor thing, but definitely not a bad one to know about, right? So, if you see me getting forests in these types of land-heavy situations a lot, that would be why. So here, very tempting to, again, keep this other Liliana around, but I think she finally has to be pitched, because Treetop Village is lethal, and it does dodge maybe 1 or 2 pieces of removal, something like Oust. Treetop Village at least isn't going to get answered by that, so I think we just have to keep our threat here, and I think we have to pitch our other Liliana, as sad as that is. Their last card in hand was a Snapcaster Mage. That is very, very bad for us. They get to snap Hieroglyphic Illuminations. This is they get 3 cards out of this play, and they get a body on field that can pressure the Lily. Man, is that bad. And now it's their turn. They get to draw for turn. Yep, feels pretty bad. But maybe we can still get there. So they're going to take the Lily off of alt. Makes sense. And we draw Lily the Last Hope. Now, this was not something that we knew was there, because remember, we shuffled with Field of Ruin, even though she was tucked by a Teferi and would have been coming back. Yeah, is it this turn, next turn? I don't remember. But regardless, that's definitely a play. So, alright. We obviously can't activate our Lily of the Veil if we want to tick her up until we get this out of our hand. So I'm just going to try this, right? Because this is a really interesting spot of the game. If they let this resolve, it gets to kill the Snapcaster for free, and like I said, then it's at least a role player in the game, and who knows, maybe ticking up to the win condition. That means we get to freely tick up the Lily, so they kinda have to answer this, but if they do, then we at least have more information with what we want to do with the rest of our turn. So they're in a Cryptic Command. They're going to counter and bounce the Liliana of the Veil. Alright, now that's a very high value play, there's no question about that. But here's the thing, right? So, if they're bouncing the Liliana of the Veil, that probably means one of 2 things. It means they know that we have to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her, right? Because we replay her, our hand is empty. If she resolves, we get to tick her up, and that's an asymmetrical discard effect, right? That's very, very good in theory. But in practice, they're still ahead of us on cards. They still have the Snapcaster to pressure Liliana. And we are arguably weaker top decks on average than a blue-white control deck, especially this late in the game where Snapcaster is just so incredibly good because the graveyards are full. So I could replay the Liliana, but what if that was just a bluff? What if they were just like, if I bounce this Liliana, they'll have to replay it, and they just won't bother attacking with the Treetop Village? What if I say, I have so much faith in the Ape Village that I'm going to fire it up and get in? What are you going to do about it? They're going to scoop it up. That's what they're going to do about it. So this was, I can't really say it's a read, right? Because, obviously I'm not sitting across from my opponent. Nothing like that. I don't necessarily have any reason to believe one or the other thing. But if my opponent bounced the Liliana of the Veil, it means they know that we have to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her, right? Because they know that we have to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentivized to replay her to get back into the game, and we're also incentiv it means they are okay with me replaying the Lily and taking her up, which means they either have a counter spell in hand, like a Logic Knot or a Mana Leak, where they can just answer her, or they think they can beat a Liliana even if she pluses one for a symmetrical discard effect. You know, maybe they've got stuff in hand they don't really care about, or maybe they've got stuff next turn that's really, really good, like a Teferi or Jace to play. So I think, you know, my line there to fire up the treetop was a little bit high risk, high reward, but I was like, you know, maybe they just have counter magic. Maybe they don't really have anything and it's a bluff. It's really hard to say. So I just said, hey, you know, if you don't have an answer, I win. And I think we were less and less favored the longer that game went on from this stage where things kind of settled after they found that Snapcaster. So it's like, hey, let's send in the apes and see what happens. And the apes, they never let us down, people. The ape village will never let you down. Just put your trust in the apes, and you'll go very far. So that was a good game. That was a good game, and it was a fun one. Felt like it might have been slipping away from us, but we just barely got there. And remember that clue I cracked, the second clue I cracked when my ooze and my tracker got in to put them to 3 instead of 4, that proved to be very, very relevant. I, you know, obviously would not have had lethal there. Would have had to replay the Lily, and who knows what would have happened there. So anyway, good game, well played. And even though there's another blue-white control video on this channel, we will go to the sideboard here because, like I said, that video was against a more mid-rangey, creature-heavy style. So here we're going to talk about how to side against classic stock blue-white miracles. Alright, my friends, sideboarding against blue-white control. And right off the bat, let's look at these Nile Spellbombs. So, they are not that graveyard heavy, but they do obviously play some Snapcaster Mage. They probably play Search for Azcanta. Those are two things that do care about the graveyard. I'm not super high on Spellbomb in general against blue-white control, but it's a fine card, right? It's never that bad against them. Again, it cantrips. It gets a artifact type in Aryard for Tarmogoyf, and this is a long, grindy game, so cantripping is never that bad. And they do utilize the graveyard to some degree. So I think I want 1 against the Miracles deck. We can leave the others in the maybe board for now, but I think 1 is probably going to be where it falls. Again, we just don't have that many cards to bring out. Engineered Explosives is a no. We'll put that over there, and we can talk about why in a little bit, but let's see what we like first. I like these Fulminator Mages. This is definitely one of the control matchups where they shine. No question about that. Answer to Colonnade and just setting them back on lands is great. Choke and Nissa Vital Force, these cards are built for this matchup. Don't think that Choke is just an I win card, because they do play Glacial Fortress, Celestial Colonnade, potentially some one-ofs like Prairie Stream or Mystic Gate, although those are less common, that can produce blue mana through a Choke. But Choke is still very, very good, even if it only shuts off a portion of their land base. That's still quite relevant. And of course, in conjunction with Fulminator Mage, Field of Ruin, and potentially Assassin's Trophy, you really can lock them forever off of blue. And Nissa Vital Force is, of course, wonderful in any of these attrition-based matchups. The fact that she can end the game with her +1 really quickly is especially useful here. Very, very good against the Terminus style builds, helping us not to overextend. And, you know, if you fire up a basic and they opt into a Terminus and they Terminus away our basic, well, that's just fine. Like, we even get to keep a basic in our deck for Field of Ruin, Path to Exile, all that other stuff. So she's so good here. Maelstrom Pulse is something that I think I'm pretty comfortable with just the 1 main, because they do play some permanents, but not that many, and we can still answer them with other things. So the other one is worth considering in the maybe board, but this might be one where we're happy with exactly 1. Golgari Charm is kind of similar. It's an out to search for Azcanta. They do play a lot of X1s. Vendilion Click might be in there. Snapcaster is in there. They might play some token things like Elspeth's Son's Champion produces tokens, Secure the Waste. These are all cards you might see. But Regen is not that live. We can maybe board it. But at least... Oh, hey, where are we going with this stuff? At least in our specific build, not particularly excited to be bringing in too many cards because we simply have so many that are good in the main deck. And I just somehow made my Golgari Charm vanish. Let me go get that back. Amateur hour over here. Golgari Charm. Back in the maybe board, where you belong. Alright. So, what else do we want here? We certainly want Duress. Duress is fantastic because it can hit almost everything we care about. Collective Brutality is a little less good simply because it can't hit Planeswalkers, but it's still probably something we want. Although, since we already have 2 main, let's leave this in the maybe board for now. Surgical Extraction is a big no. It's a trap against this type of deck that has a lot of different win cons, a lot of different value engines. Definitely not worth it. Kalidas and Languish, definitely not the matchup where they shine. And Engineered Explosives just does not have enough targets. Again, they can make some tokens. This could hit. This can hit 2 drops like Snapcaster and Search. It's just too low impact. We just are going to stay away from cards like that and bring in our real haymakers. So, let's see here. We've got 6 in. 5 we can consider in the maybe board, some of higher value than others. So, what do we not like? Well, 4 Fatal Push is a definite free cut. Again, they do play some targets for it. We just have way better cards. We don't want these very conditional cards left in the deck anymore. Abrupt Decay is more of a maybe to come out, in my opinion. It's also conditional. In fact, even more conditional than Fatal Push in some ways because Fatal Push at least can hit Colonnade, which is quite relevant. But Abrupt Decay is interesting because it's a little, like, sometimes it can be really awkward to kill a Vendilion click in an efficient manner. Sometimes they can resolve the click at an awkward time where you can't get a Revolt trigger for your Fatal Push if they're still around or if it's game 1. Abrupt Decaying a click in response to its trigger is a nice clean answer. More importantly, this is an answer to... to Search for Iscanta, that's what I'm looking for, and Detention Sphere. And those are some cards that are pretty reasonable against us. I have been seeing a couple more Gideon of the Trials than I used to as well against blue-white decks. I know that that is mostly a relic of the past, of the era when I played blue-white control, actually, before Jace was unbanned, and we were on more Supreme Verdicts and Gideon Squad, you know, Trials, Jura, Ally of Zendikar, potentially, all those together were great. Spreading Seas and all that good stuff. So, but in case they play Gideon, you know, we might want to leave this Abrupt Decay, and that's a maybe board card in my opinion. Tassiger is great. We like our One of Pulse. Tracker is amazing. All of the Lilianas are amazing. Collective Brutality is great. You know, we might be bringing a third in. Scavenging Ooze. So, I do think we want a slightly higher threat density than we have in Game 1. We want to bring in more threats than our main deck has. So we're bringing in kind of 2 threats, right? Because I count Fulminator as roughly half of a threat, because obviously some of the time he'll just be a Stone Rain, you know, on resolution. Nissa is definitely a threat, though. So we're bringing in basically 2 threats, so I think we can cut one, and I think it should be a Scavenging Ooze. I think that's a pretty clear cut here. So Scooz is a fine card in the matchup like we saw in Game 1. It can come down, it can be a Grizzly Bear starting to pressure them. The clock it provided was relevant. Again, we got exactly lethal with the Treetop Village before they could really quite stabilize after getting some advantage. And if we didn't have the Scooz cracking in a few times, we would be nowhere near lethal with that. And of course, keeping their graveyard down is nice. But they're not that desirable in this matchup. They're clunky in multiples. I like going down to 2. I think that's perfectly fair. Tarmogoyf, we just want to keep the Goyf around. It's still our best clock. Assassin's Trophy is wonderful here. Absolutely wonderful. It is. It lets us have a high density of good, clean answers to Jace and Teferi and Elspeth without having to bring in another Maelstrom Pulse, which can be, again, a little bit clunky. It can rot in hand in some crucial windows of the game. This can also take away a lot of other things. It can attack their land base too, which is quite relevant. Attacking the land is so good here in a lot of situations. Not that they don't play a lot of basics, because they do, but it can just be really nice against a colonnade deck in general. We want to keep access to pretty much all of our discard. You know, sometimes your Inquisition will blank, and that's unfortunate. I still think we want all three. So here, it looks like maybe we should cut this decay after all, but you know what I'm going to do is cut a land. I'm going to cut a land, and the reason for that is, like, as much as Tireless Tracker is great in this matchup, we don't want to dilute her landfall triggers. You know, 24 is still a really high land count, and against a deck like this where you know for a fact the game is going to go long if both players are competing in it, we can just increase our density of action by a little bit by cutting a land here. So what land do we cut if we're going to cut a land? Definitely not basics against a blue-white deck with Path to Exile, Field of Ruin, maybe Settle the Wreckage, blah blah blah. Definitely not manlands, definitely not Overgrown Tomb, because this is still a prime fetch target, especially when our life total's not that relevant. So it's got to be either Verdant Catacombs or Blooming Marsh, and I think you could go either way, but I'd probably lean toward a Blooming Marsh. So I would be pretty happy submitting this 60, and indeed this 60 is what I submitted for this matchup. That said, you could very easily justify cutting this Abrupt Decay, and maybe you want to bring in, I would say the highest rated maybe board cards here are the 3rd Brutality or the 2nd Spellbomb. I think we can pretty well do without this stuff, so this is our 62, and we leave out 2 of these 3 cards, and that's what it should look like, in my opinion, against blue-white control. So, as always, any alternative suggestions you have would be most welcome. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this matchup, but, you know, let's just go to game 2 for now with this and see how it treats us. Alright everybody, game 2 against blue-white control. We are on the draw, and I like our hand a lot. 4 lands with Tracker is quite nice. Turn 1 Inquisition is quite nice. We've got all the colors in abundance. We don't have any basics, which is great. We want to leave all of our basics in against blue-white control. So when they tax us over the course of the game, we never run out of lands to get and free cards to get off of their interaction. Tarmogoyf is an interesting one. This is definitely our premier threat on 2. But right now we are just a little light on interaction. Right now we have to expose the Tracker on turn 4 to get our clue, and that's all well and good, but, you know, it could leave us vulnerable to some sweeper effects, but I have faith in our deck to draw us into more interaction, and we've got good turn 1, turn 2 sequence here. I really like our hand. Look at that. Ask and you shall receive. We've got some really nice interaction right off the top. Liliana turn 3 is now our plan. Almost certainly. We'll have to see what how the first few turns progress, of course. But alright, so is Liliana still our plan looking at their hand? The answer is yes. The first Path to Exile, in my opinion, is just fine for us. We can really utilize the ramp, even if we already have enough lands to do everything. Just getting ramped anytime before like turn 5 is pretty good. And of course, Negate is a really clean answer to Liliana, so we go ahead and take away the Negate. They've got another nice grindy hand for the matchup. Just like game 1, they opened on a 3-lander. They've got some really high value card draw in the hand, so certainly has been an uphill battle both games in terms of, you know, fighting through a lot of card advantage on their side of the table, but we can do it. They're going to play a Flooded Strand, they're going to pass. Alright, so there's our Abrupt Decay. It's nice if they find an early search for Escanta, so I don't mind having that in the opener. That said, this might be Liliana fodder if we play her next turn and if she resolves and if we tick her up and all that good stuff. Because the rest of our hand, Tracker and lands, is still really good. So our Tarmogoyf is going to resolve. They're going to play out the 3rd land that we know about, and they will pass. Alright, drawn another Goyf. Sure. Not particularly good right now, but could be useful down the line, that's for sure. Alright, we really wouldn't mind a path even more now, but they declined to path, so here we've got no choice but to shock in and try to resolve a Liliana. They're going to opt in response, okay, looking for Logic Knot or maybe Mono Leak if that's in the deck. They don't have it. Beautiful. This is very, very good for us. Liliana on turn 3. Better on the play than on the draw usually, but still quite good. And yeah, here it's time to pitch the Abrupt Decay. Definitely just going to keep our threats in hand for now. They're going to pitch an Ancestral Vision. Okay, I'm never sad to see that go. It is a slow one, and they're kind of having to race the Liliana Ultimate now. But the fact that they voluntarily pitched an Ancestral Vision is very good for us, potentially, because it's a card that's tough to beat. It's just a 3-for-1. Also a little scary, so you know, I know they have Jason Hieroglyphic Illuminations, they have one unknown, and they're in a Path Goyf, sure. So that worked out pretty well for us, because like I said, I'm very happy to get that Goyf path now, and we even got to crack in for 3 first. So our sequencing is paying off very well. They're going to go get an island, and they've got a 4th Flooded Strand. All 4 Flooded Strands in the first 4 turns. Kind of unusual. And what are they tapping out for? Is it the Jace? It sure is. And they're going to Fate Seal us. Okay. This is interesting. I would not... I don't know. I think they might have wanted to brainstorm here, and here is why. Because unless they're really next leveling us, and they know our deck inside out, and they're worried about us going untapped land into Nissa Vital Force and attacking Jace down with a land, they should, you know, which we can't even do right now, but they don't know that. They should feel pretty safe to stay at 3 with Jace, right? We're obviously not a Lightning Bolt deck, and we don't have a manland, we don't have a threat, there's nothing else in the BGX midrange, or excuse me, the straight Golgari midrange that has haste. So, like, what is he afraid of staying at 3? So ticking up the loyalty doesn't matter. Now, Fate Seal is obviously a nice ability in and of itself, right? But he doesn't know our hand, so he doesn't really know what he's looking for, besides generally, like, leaving subpar cards on top, I guess. And maybe he just wants to take away an answer to Jace, like he's trying to bottom Trophy or Pulse. I don't really know. I think going for the card advantage in selection of Brainstorm there was the play, in my humble opinion, but I don't know one card in his hand at least, so who knows? But we get to untap, and oh boy, you left a Verdant Catacombs on top, and this is what I mean. So, like, to his mind, or his or her mind, it's like, sure, you know, they can have a fetch land, what do I care? Well, it's gonna be 2 cards for us, essentially. So, even though Hissing Quagmire is a good card in the matchup, we're gonna pitch it here because our other cards we rate more highly, and they had an island left in hand that they get rid of. And now, of course, we get to play the tracker. We get to use the Verdant Catacombs they so kindly left on top for us. We're going to main phase crack it just because it's, you know, playing around anything that they could have in a response to the fetch land activation. We don't care about our life total so much. Now here, I was kind of reflexively just saying, all right, don't overextend. Let's just pass, and we'll hold up a clue activation and bluff, you know, Trophy, or I guess not Trophy because we'd use it now, but Abrupt Decay or something, Fatal Push. But then I kind of stopped my auto yield and said, you know what? I'm just going to make him have something. I know he has Hieroglyphic Illuminations in hand. He can Brainstorm next turn with Jace, of course, but he's got a blind draw off the top. So a blind Terminus is his best out. He can Brainstorm with Jace. Like, even if he sets up a Terminus for next turn, I can attack the Jace off the field. I can tick Lily up, and then they've got to answer her before she ults too. I've still got a couple clues waiting in the wings. I think, even though my instincts told me to just slow roll it, I think the play here is to pressure the board. So let's see what happens. They're going to untap, they're going to draw, they're going to play a land, And well, it just shows them scooping. I believe they did brainstorm with Jace first, and then they scooped. So our pressure is rewarded. They have a hieroglyphic illuminations in hand. Who knows what they saw off the brainstorm, but it clearly was not an answer to our board or to Liliana. And that just, like, they weren't dead, obviously, but they were really far behind. Doesn't look like they could beat our board about to get rid of the Jace, and our card advantage from the clues, and our Liliana approaching ultimate, and probably getting a one-sided discard next turn. Like, might look like a pretty premature scoop from them, and like I said, they did brainstorm. They didn't just scoop without brainstorming, but I think they were very, very far behind if they didn't see anything too appealing with that brainstorm. So I think that game would have gone on for sure if we had not played the Tarmogoyf, right? Because then, you know, that's the other thing is they could have fate sealed us again and, you know, kept the Jace out of aggro range. But now with Tarmogoyf down, even if they fate seal, all we have to do is crack a clue, and if both of our stuff connects, there goes the Jace. So anyway, both games here were ended by me choosing to be a little bit aggressive in terms of prioritizing creatures. So in game one, it was deciding between replaying my Liliana of the Veil after they bounced it, or firing up the treetop and making them have something. I fired up the treetop, they didn't have it, we won the game. Here, it was deciding between playing it safe and continuing to leverage my advantage and not letting them get a 2-for-1, or saying, you know what, pressuring the Jace is more important with our Liliana approaching ult. If they 2-for-1 us, that's not great, but it basically has to be a blind terminus off the top for it to be really, really good for them. We have enough clues to stay in the game, you know, in terms of advantage, at least for the short term. So we kind of erred on the side of making bold, proactive decisions in terms of pressuring their board, and in both games it paid off. Remember that there is, you know, the golden rule that you don't generally want to expose more than 2 creatures at once, if you can at all help it. But also don't be afraid to play aggressively within the bounds of that rule. Like, don't be afraid to play out the second creature, especially if you've already got value from one of the 2 creatures. We've already gotten two draws off this tracker, you know? Like, definitely can afford to expose the Goyf there, and it paid off. We got the win. So good games, well played to the opponent. Blue-white control is a tough matchup. It's I think we're likely to be out top decked by them on average. And that's kind of a bad position for our deck to be in, because we have just as much air, if not more, in our deck as they do. And if their bombs are bigger than our bombs, that can be really tough. So we have a lot of great cards in the matchup, but how the decks come together overall, I think we are at a slight disadvantage. And that disadvantage is probably alleviated a little bit post-side. Like, we might be approaching 50-50 post-side. It might be a little, you know, a little less favorable before that. Regardless, the lesson here is that you have to know when to be cautious and when to be bold, and we also really need to see some of our best cards to realistically beat good blue-white draws, which, don't get me wrong, they had good draws against us both games. Definitely good draws on their end, good openers and good top decks. So we need to see cards like Tireless Tracker and Liliana of the Veil to realistically beat them. Like, the 1-for-1s are great, they're an important piece of the puzzle, like Inquisition, but they're not going to do the heavy lifting that we need to pull ahead of their cards in this matchup. So certainly an interesting one. I always relish playing against decks like this as long as the games aren't totally one-sided one way or the other, which can happen. You know, the blind terminuses can be pretty rough if they happen multiple times, but otherwise it's a pretty sweet matchup. So as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of the great feedback I've been getting on my YouTube comments, in the Facebook group, on MTG Salvation. All of it means a lot to me. It's got me motivated to just scrape together what little free time I have to keep trying to make videos for you and keep trying to master the Golgari archetype. It's an archetype worth mastering. It's really really rewards intimate knowledge of the deck, staying on top of the meta, technical, nuanced sideboarding, all of this stuff. Like, the ceiling on this deck is very, very high. So thanks for all the great feedback, and I hope your own games are as rewarding as mine have been with this deck if you're on a similar one. So stay tuned to the channel. I've got more videos coming up as always, and I will see you for the next video. Have a great day.